Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game Scram! Critters vs. Campers. This is sent me by Bezier Games, and it's designed by Ted Alspach. Chase off critters faster than the other team. When your team has the fewest animals, scram! Let me show you how to play. So this is a team game, actually, and you can play with 4 or 6 campers. There are special rules for 3, but yeah, you basically set up the table so that each player sits between 2 opponents. So this would be a 4-player setup here. And everyone gets 3 cards face down and 2 cards face up, and you're not allowed to look at your face down cards. So your goal is that this is your campsite, and the critters here have different number values, and that is the amount of damage that critter has done. So you want to have a lower score. Lower numbers are good. And your team wants to have a tidier total, a lower total than your opponents. Each round ends when either the draw deck runs out or a camper chooses to declare scram. We'll get into what scram is later. After you do 4 rounds, whoever is the team with the lowest cumulative score wins. So on your turn, you have 3 possible actions you can take. You choose one of them. You can either draw the top card from the draw deck. On most turns, you'll just draw one and immediately play it. You can draw from either the draw deck or the top of the discard pile. Let's say we draw from the draw deck. Now, you secretly look at it, and you decide how you want to play it. You can either play it for its action. In this case, you could play it to view another card on the board. Or you can use it to replace cards in your campsite, or if you don't want it, you could just discard it. I'll get into the replacing cards in a second. If you draw from the discard pile, you can only use it to replace cards in your campsite. You cannot use the action on the card. Also, this card that you drew, you can't tell people, if you draw from the draw pile, you can't tell your teammates or anybody what you drew. So all that is secret info. If you ever have no cards in your campsite, you can only draw from the draw deck. You cannot draw from the discard pile. So if you play a card for its action, all the ones that are 5 to 13 have actions on them. When you play it for its action, you just discard it into the discard pile. Some examples on the board we can see here. Exchange 2 cards. This one is place this card face up in front of you. Discard 2 cards. Let's see, we got this one. Flip 1 card face up. Flip 2 cards face up. Discard 1 card. So yeah, all these animal cards have different effects that affect what can be seen, who has what card, so on and so forth. Now, regardless of whether you drew from the draw deck or discard pile, you can replace 1 or more cards in your team's campsites by placing matching valued cards onto the discard pile and placing the newly drawn card in your campsite. You can use this to get rid of cards in your team's campsites and lower your team's overall score. Now, you may not use the action then if you're going to keep it. Now, you can always discard any single card in your campsite and replace it with your new card. However, in order to replace more than 1 card at a time, and if you want to include cards in your teammate's campsite, they have to have the same value. So let me show you an example of that. So you can see here that this snake here, number 9, my teammate across has a 9. And if I wanted to get rid of both of them, I could pick both of them and discard them. And then I have to place this card in my campsite. Now, you can also do this with cards that are face down. So if you choose to do it like that, let me put those cards back. Let's say I decided to do this, I slide forward this raccoon for replacement. Now, I could just replace the raccoon card because that's a single card. But let's say I think I know one of my teammates' face down cards. I could then pick, I don't know, let's say this one. Then you flip the cards, and that is not a match because I just picked that at random. But if any of them don't match, you have failed to replace cards, and they just go back into their campsite. If, however, this were an 11, then you would be able to discard them. But regardless, when you try to do the replace action, whether you just put this card into your campsite. So if I did what I did before, the 2 9s, discard them. Now this 5 is here. Now, if you failed to replace any matching cards because of an error, you check to see if you have any extra penalties. If 3 of the cards you slid forward were unique values, you draw 1 extra card from the deck and place it face down at either end. If 4 were unique values, you draw 2, and if 5 or more were unique, you draw 3. So the more mistakes you make, the more punishments you get in terms of cards added to your campsite. And then, like I mentioned before, if you just don't like a card, well, this is a good card, but if you didn't want it for some reason, like, I don't know, this one, you can just discard it. That can be your turn. Now, these equal signs cards, these always match the other cards you choose. They're almost like a wild. The first card you choose can have an equals. Whenever you discard 1 or more equal cards, all the discarded equal cards must be placed below other cards. So let's say I use it to get rid of this 11. Let's say this was in my opponent's campsite, because you can't replace it with a card in your hand. Let's say I did a turn, I got this 13, ooh, that's a rough card, and I picked the equal and the 11. These would be discarded, the 11 would be put on top, and then the 13 would go into my campsite. Now, if you have 2 or fewer cards in your campsite at the start of your turn, and you believe your team has the lower score, you can choose to declare Scram and trigger the end of the round. When you declare Scram, your turn ends immediately. You don't get to do anything else. Each other player gets 1 final turn. And you have to be careful, because if you declare Scram but your team doesn't end up with the lower total score, there will be consequences. So, 2 ways the end of the round can trigger. Either if somebody does Scram, or if we run out of cards in the draw deck. Then, you add up all the values, you reveal all your cards, add up all the values to determine the final score. Now, if the team that declared Scram has the lower score or is tied for the lower score, then they score 0 points for the round. If the team that declared Scram has the higher score because they made a mistake, then they have to add plus 10 to their score for the round. The team that did not declare Scram, they just score normally, whatever they scored for the round. And then you write down your scores for your total, and whichever team had the lower recorded score wins, and the camper on that team with the lowest individual score will go first for the next round. And you play 4 rounds. If it's a 4 camper game, if it's a 6 camper game, you play 3 rounds. Now, the equal cards, you score each equal card. If you have any equal cards in your campsite, they have the same value as the lowest numbered card in your campsite. If you only have equal cards somehow, then they are all 0. And that's the game. At the end of the last round, you add up whoever had the lowest cumulative score wins. If there's a tie, the lowest score in the final round, there's a bunch of tiebreakers. But that's pretty much it. Just some basic rules of communication. You cannot discuss anything on your face down cards. You can't indicate or hint at cards. You can discuss face-up cards and their values, and you can discuss strategy as long as you don't reveal any face-down cards. Otherwise, that's the game. Just try to get your campsites as low as possible, as fast as you can. So this was a lot of fun. I feel like you don't come across too many team board games. Like, you'll see oftentimes like variants, but not the main game being a team game. It's fun figuring out what cards you and your partner have throughout the round and being as efficient as possible to get your high cards out of your campsite. Since you can't communicate what cards you have, it becomes a fun sort of trying to like read your partner's intent and indirectly helping each other out. It also becomes a fun race of trying to clean up your camps faster before your opponents potentially call out Scram. I mean, it's just a fun little game. There's also the memory element, because you actually can't check face down cards after you've looked at them. So having to keep that info in your mind as the game continues is also a fun challenge. One issue is that it can be pretty hard to catch up if a team manages to score 0 with a Scram, but I do like that there is a risk for calling Scram, which kind of semi-mitigates it. Anyway, I think it's a really fun team game. The actions on the cards are also fun and have some of the fun sort of take that mechanics when you give your opponents bad cards and stuff. If you're looking for a light but engaging team game, then I recommend this one. I think it's fun.